Female primary fantasy is centered around the better homes and gardens dream. A home, white picket fence, marriage, children, and a high status rich husband that will finance the bulk of this dream. Children are very expensive, and without a good man, aka a good provider, single mothers struggle big time. The male primary fantasy is access to young, beautiful women without the risk of rejection. It's the dream of sexual variety at low cost, without giving up the bulk of a man's time and financial resources. In the Western world, when a man dates, there is the expectation that he will provide provision and support, that he will finance the primary female fantasy whilst giving up his primary male fantasy of sexual variety. This is why a man is expected to pay on the first date. It's a signal that he's willing and able to provide. In Thailand and the Philippines, a Western man is able to live out his primary male fantasy at a much lower cost and at much lower risk than financing the primary female fantasy in the Western world. This is why these countries are so amazing for men and why Western men keep going back again and again. When the price of living out the primary male fantasy is much lower than financing the primary female fantasy, how do you compete with that? When the divorce rate in the West is so high, when the laws are so biased against men, and when the risk of losing everything is so high versus the benefits of the male primary fantasy path being so great, and the risks of that path being lower in comparison, it's a wonder that more men don't choose this path. A Western man is a walking ATM wherever he is in the world. That's how he's valued. That's the expectation upon him to be a good provider. A Western man needs to decide whether he accepts this societal expectation and obligation, or whether he will say, fuck that, and everyone who tries to place that expectation on him for their benefit at his expense. Feminism has actually empowered men to be able to live out our primary male fantasies. Before feminism and equality, men had no choice other than to be a good provider. Feminism has enabled us men to see the chains we were bound by, to see the farm, if you will. MGTOW men and men that have experience in Southeast Asia are way ahead of their peers on this. It takes a certain kind of thinking and analysis to be able to see and understand all this, but once seen and understood, it's impossible to unsee. With the rise of feminism, we have seen women unchained from their traditional roles. However, the expectation upon men to continue being a traditional man has not really changed. Men are not really allowed to give up their traditional roles. Society crumbles and comes to a complete halt without men's contributions. There will always be men, however, that see through the bullshit and societal programming and will up and go their own way. Women don't want men to give up their traditional male roles. It's bad for business. When too many men do this, it makes it much harder to find a quote-unquote good man, or a man that's a good provider that will provide them with provision and support whilst giving up his dreams and his primary male fantasy. Now remember this, no one is more hated than he who speaks the truth. Plato. All the best, everyone. I'm the Pretender.